What up, y'all? It is Anti-Negative here, and this is episode 1 of the Magic the Blabbering podcast, where I'm going to be blabbering about magic. All right, so what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about a certain little card named Vivi and Cauldron. So we'll be talking about that. So as you can see, we got some space over here on the left-hand side. So we can definitely showcase some of the things I'm talking about over there. We got our little chickens. We have a little dancing glorp on the bottom right. Also, I'm a glorp. This is what I look like. I can turn on and off my mustache at will. And it's very interesting. I may or may not just turn on and off my mustache. Anyways, so first topic at hand, Cauldron and Vivi.
Okay, first, before getting into it, I want to reference this Magic Metagame Mentor article that I believe is written by Frank Karsten, the math dude. Yep, it is. The math dude himself that does a lot of, metagame analysis and all that. So there are no planned bans for Vivi at this current time, but if they do plan to ban something, this podcast is about what they should be looking at and why they should be looking at specifically X card, which I'll get into in a second here. But they referenced a lot of things, i.e., we can kill Vivi, we can exile their graveyard, rest in peace, high noon, obliterating bolt, strategic betrayal, clarion conqueror, ultima. These are all pretty bad examples of removal for this deck. A lot of the removal that actually is efficient for this deck is also in the mirror for Cauldron. So what really is the point of them posting this article is that they're not going to do anything until the end of the RCQ round, which is November 24th. So look then for any types of bans. So completely open to invest $800 into this deck. And try to beat out the metagame by being better with the deck and drawing better with the deck. There's not much else to be said there. But yeah, so that's something to note about this deck in particular and how Wizards publicly feels about it. Nothing getting banned yet. They had a window on the 18th of August, which has come and passed now. So we're looking towards November for this metagame to even its way out by the classic style of let's see what the next two sets do to the metagame and what will Avatar and Spider-Man do in order to get things rolling. So anyways, without further ado.
First off, Cauldron has been a fair card. Cauldron has been a very chill card up until Cauldron broke Vivi. And this is not the first way Cauldron broke Vivi. So when Final Fantasy dropped, we immediately saw the synergy of Vivi and a little card called Geralf's Fleshright. And that was pretty much the first brew people were messing with. And what happens is you cast another spell with Geralf's Fleshright, and then you create a bunch of little zombies with a bunch of 1/1 counters. Those all get Vivi's ability, which then allow you to cast more spells, etc., etc. Because that's how Cauldron works. You exile a card, i.e. Vivi, and then anything with 1/1 counters gains that ability. In theory, Cauldron looks pretty broken, right? Cauldron doesn't look super balanced, but it's fun. Want to go back to like what broke Cauldron initially? Obviously, anything commander with a broken ability can just snap Cauldron right in half. And there's simply, 20,000 cards in commander, so you don't want to think about that. There's too many cards. There's simply too many cards to balance that card around. So that's not even worth discussion. Because it's really just a silly card to there. CEDH and stuff, they're using Vivi in other ways. The way CEDH wants to use Vivi is they want to play it turn 2. With the craziest nut draw in the world, they could play Vivi turn 1. They could storm off, play Underworld Breach, and win the game on turn 3. So that is what Vivi can do in CDH. Does not require anything. So yeah, Vivi in the command zone, a little broken. But That doesn't matter. Nobody cares about that. Other than that, Cauldron has never been broken. So there was a lot of discussion on whether or not we should ban Cauldron or ban Vivi. And at the end of the day, you have to kind of weigh the cost of each card. Not their mana cost, but what they're actually doing. How much setup does each card have? So a lot of people like to poke fun at game devs, Magic card designers. Who the hell is balancing this game? And whenever you start having that discussion about cards in general, when they're broken, the conversation kind of ends there. The designers don't deserve that, frankly. They're doing their job. They have a job, and their job is to make cards. Now, whether or not Wizards of the Coast wants to give them crazy crunch and deadlines that are just frankly unfair too quickly, they need too many cards. Certain cards will just get pushed through, and there won't be enough time to test them. And if anybody has any thoughts about that, simply go listen to Mark Rosewater talk about this stuff, who doesn't deserve any hate really as well. So people giving hate, saying, who's balancing this? Why didn't they test this? There are simple and very easy reasons to see. They didn't have the time. They weren't given the time, and it's not their fault. It is simply crunch. So yeah, anyways. So you're going to get fun cards that do fun things, like Vivi, like Cauldron. And if you go and look at the prices of like Cauldron compared to the rest of Wilds of Eldraine, you'll find a stark difference between everything else in that entire set. That is the most expensive card and most sought after card in the entire set. It is actually pretty hard to find a more impactful card from that set, which is weird for Eldraine. But, you know, Adventures, while they were pretty good, they had their time. There was like Mossburn Dread Knight. There was a few other cards that made a pretty decent impact on Standard for a while. But Standards kept ramping up since then. OTJ, Outlaws of Thunder Junction, got Duskmourn, Bloombarrel. Those all kind of like vastly outshined things that came before it, like Wilds of Eldraine. Anyways, so Cauldron has been pretty good inside cookies. It's been good inside Exhaust decks, which had a brief time in Standard, right when Aether Drift came out. And then since Cauldron's release, people literally have been trying to break it in a very specific way. How do I make infinite mana? How do I make infinite turns with my mana? And you can do infinite turns with Ultimecia from Final Fantasy. You can do transform cheese. A lot of other ways to like do things like that. Those aren't very good. But I believe the untap with, you know, a few things underneath Cauldron. I think it was Sleep Curse Fae and Omen Hawker and a few other things that allowed you to make infinite mana. I think Kami of Whispered Hopes. And yeah, kind of a weird combo. I think they would like draw their whole deck or something like that. Either way, they were able to make infinite mana with Cauldron. So this was the most broken way to play it. The most fair and balanced way and somewhat competitive way to play it was in Cookies, which was an Ashlizzle deck that she popularized pretty much first. And that simply was using Cauldron to make things unblockable, to use Surge Engine to turn things into 5/4s, you know, things like that. Not broken. Very fair. Anyways, so what do all these combos with Cauldron have in common? They require a way to put things in the graveyard, a graveyard in general that's not being fucked with through Ghost Vacuum, through Rest in Peace, through anything. And that requires a lot of setup. So you need to have that. You need to have a creature. They need to have a 1/1 counter. So in between all of these steps, there's a lot of moments to interact with their board. So when you try to weigh something like who should be banned, why should we ban this? You got to think about a little thing called A plus B mechanics. And this mechanic is pretty well lined out in Mark Rosewater's podcasts. So A plus B mechanics. Why is that important here? Well, okay, so in order to make something infinite with Cauldron, to get Cauldron online in general, need to go back to that original thing, which is, how do I get something in the graveyard? That is A. All right, now I need to have the creature to put the thing on. That is B. So when we think about those things specific, A is the creature in your graveyard, and now you need to have the creature itself. That's B. And then I need to have Cauldron as well. So that's C. So there's 3 parts to this equation. And yes, you can argue that VV is just going to win the game when you fulfill these conditions, like everything inside of Visit Cauldron, just discarding stuff. So it's really easy to get VV online. That's beside the point. So the point here is, do A, B, and C get fulfilled by 1 card? The answer here is no, in Cauldron's case. So that leads me to my next point. What does VV do? VV has these conditions as well. If you're curious about the design on VV, Gavin has an interesting discussion on how and why they designed VV in the way that they did. You have VV itself, that's A. Cast a non-creature spell, not instants or sorceries. Non-creature, gives it a counter, and then you can activate VV and then create the mana. So A plus B here is being fulfilled. C, which is not being fulfilled, is the non-creature spell. Ways to get power onto VV. So when you go and bypass this with Cauldron, it becomes a little bit oppressive. Why? Because if you have a Tursa, discards 2 cards, could be a VV. You could play Fear of Missing Out, FOMO, discard VV earlier, play Tursa, or just they don't interact with your FOMO. You play Cauldron, you get 3 power on your FOMO. Now it's a VV FOMO. You tap it. Well, not tap it, you activate it, and then you get 3 mana. So there's so many things that are happening here that happen all at once with VV. And again, the combos with Cauldron didn't break like this before. So the huge linchpin between VV and Cauldron is always going to be VV. What made this deck even more consistent pre-rotation was Thrillseeker. What they replaced that with was Draconautic's Engineer in order to create a 4/4 dragon, give it haste. Draconautic's Engineer can also put a counter on itself. So you could create +1 mana by just giving itself haste and a counter. Very explosive turns. Essentially, what this is trying to do, because I played this deck after the last PT, because I saw Paolo play it. I thought it was pretty cool. So I obviously just played it a bit, and I was like, wow, this is very broken. Why? Because you would hit a wall with this deck. It doesn't have trample. Monstrous Rage is gone. It's banned. So how do you get in? Well, you get in by throwing Thrillseeker into the graveyard, by playing Thrillseeker with VV mana, by sacrificing it, by putting it under Cauldron after that, and then just getting giant, 11/11, 10/10 marauding Makos and throwing them at your opponent's face while making 10 mana in the process to throw everything at their face. So blocking wasn't an option. That card's gone. It's done. It's rotated. So now they're using Draconautic's Engineer in order to do this. So the common denominator between all these combos, though, in the deck are Profs, Cauldron, little shitter dudes that you can put these counters on, ways to get those counters. Overall, though, the deck has to run pretty low to the ground. I don't believe there's anything that you should be running that's over 3 mana, unless you want to run a Quantum Rizzler or Meringue River Regent for fun. Those don't really go in this deck, but I do see Quantum Riddler every now and then. And then just in the Arena Championship, some people were running that. And it's not a terrible card. Definitely is a good one. Essentially, though, without all the mana, you don't do anything. And the deck simply becomes a Profs deck, which it does very efficiently. And if you were to take out all that mana for fun, for free, then you end up making this still tier 1 because it's aggro. You know, this deck can be aggro, can be tempo, but it's doing it in a way where instead of, you know, just playing certain numbers of creatures that draw, you know, moderate amounts of cards, it is playing only the best ones, only the right ones, things that draw cards and discard cards. So your 1-drop Mako can always get counters on it. And this is like something that you have to keep in mind when playing against it, because the Mako, if they find Winter Night Stories, can just flip the game on its head. You play Mako, you play Stories, you draw 2, discard 2, it becomes a 3/3. If they have profs, then, you know, it becomes a 6/6. And then this is like post you dealing with their board a few times, possibly while you saw them discard a VV and then try to put a counter on something, i.e. like Tursa or FOMO or something like that. So now they did that and you're interacting with their board and say, no, I don't want you to make all that mana. I'll kill the thing in response. So this is post all that. And you've now they've top decked a Mako. And now they have a 6/6 Mako who has 6 power, ends up drawing them 3 more cards because you can play that Winter Night Stories without having to harmonize it. Yeah. So there's, you know, the way to play it, which is correct. And it's probably to harmonize it post combat. Because it's a 6 power creature. You can play Winter Night Stories for one mana, keep up 6 mana from your Mako, draw 3 cards, discard hopefully 2 lands, play another 2 dudes. You know, so you're doing a lot of stuff. This deck is explosive as hell. And it's not because Cauldron. It is because VV's under the Cauldron. So the discussion here, to bring it all back into focus, is what regulates this deck? What fulfills its mechanics, its A plus B mechanics, all on its own? And that, at the end of the day, will always be VV. Why? Because VV does a little bit too much for standard. And Cauldron, when combined with this card, creates a Corey Still situation, creates a Bean situation. And that's just being used as an example to say, this makes removing this card a little shitty for everyone. Because now, in a lot of situations, coming from someone who's played this deck a bunch, if you don't have a FOMO, if you don't have Stories and you've ran out a couple cards, sometimes it's just correct to rent out VV, even if you can discard it at this point. Why? Why would you just rent out VV into their removal? Well, because you probably have Cauldron. And if you have Cauldron, you want them to use their removal on something. VV requires a lot of setup, a lot of non-creature spells. This is the A plus B plus C. So VV fulfills A plus B by himself. He is the thing that makes the mana that gives himself counters. C here is the non-creature spells. So when you bypass that, i.e. just put its ability on something with power already, like a Tursa, like a FOMO, any of these cards that would hopefully have, you know, 4 mana turn 4. So you can play FOMO into Cauldron. Also maybe turn 2 you played profs. Like this is one of like the best like lines you can take here. As opposed to running out your whole hand and just kind of shitting your hand onto the battlefield. You can go turn 1 Mako into turn 2 profs. This is always going to give you a 2/2 Mako. So normally I don't typically like to run out FOMO as quick as possible because of the fact that you can just run everything into removal and it all dies. So turn 1 Mako into profs. You get a 2/2 Mako. They probably will kill it. They will want to kill it if they can. And then turn 3, you run out VV, knowing well that you have Cauldron in hand, a way to discard the VV too. You just want them to kill the VV. You don't want your thing that you're going to Cauldron onto to die in response. Why? Because that VV is going to be smaller than the thing that you Cauldron onto. So you want to create this really hard situation because if they don't remove that VV, it still will win by itself. So that's where it will create this really, really complex issue of, do I kill VV? Do I not? The answer is yes, you have to kill the VV. Therefore, putting it into your graveyard turns on their next turn. So a lot of hard things happened here. You ended up being forced to kill the VV for them just to bring it back with Cauldron essentially on 5 different bodies. So You're not having to deal with 1 VV anymore. You have to deal with 2. And both of those are preloaded with power. So it's not very fun to deal with. The best turn after this, like I just said, is Fear of Missing Out with props on the field and Cauldron. Why? Because you can draw a card with FOMO, put Cauldron onto the field, get 3 power. What this does is allows you to play with the 3 mana you get from FOMO and VV, a Tursa. Tursa then draws 2 cards ideally, and then that Tursa becomes a 5, it actually becomes a 6/6 in this situation, and then you can swing in with it because it has haste. And then post-combat, you have 6 mana because it has counters. Then you can draw more cards, play more cards, and then they have this gigantic board to deal with. This is after they just killed the VV on turn 3, by the way. So, in conclusion of this little situation, if you remove VV from the deck, this deck becomes fair. This deck does not have infinite mana to do all this stuff with. The Prowess deck does not need VV to win. And because it has VV, which is it Prowess, if we were to look at this deck really quick, it is very, very, very greedy. So greedy that it only plays VV as a creature right now. It is playing Storm Chaser's Talent, Astrologian's Planisphere, and that's it. It doesn't play anything else. So every single one of their creatures can either be killed or just answered with a Flood Maw, which is weird. It's so weird that I don't want to play that deck. I think that deck's pretty bad. And it's not bad in the conventional sense. It's bad in the sense that it doesn't do anything as efficient as what VV Cauldron's doing. So you're playing at a disadvantage, and you're still playing 2 Cauldrons because of the fact that Planisphere gets counters. You can put Planisphere on stuff, it gives it counters, and then you can play your one of main deck Cauldron and exile a VV. And then what happens after that is you use all that mana with the Storm Chaser's Talent and start buying back your instants and sorceries and start replaying them like Stock Up, like a bunch of these other cards. It's not playing any of the props package, which that's why you don't even look at Winter Night Stories here, because Winter Night Stories is completely fair if you minus profs from the equation. So again, we're looking at cards that fulfill their own conditions and do it in such a way that it becomes toxic and unfair for everybody involved. And that's, again, what VV does. So, I love Final Fantasy IX. I play this deck too, So I am no stranger to seeing this deck in action. And what happens when you play this deck is you get to know why it's really broken. It's really dynamic. It does a lot of different things really, really quickly. And it essentially plays 3 decks all at once at the same time. Albeit it's fun, make a lot of decisions. You can kind of get your way out of any situation. It's one of the reasons why Control is not very good against it. Why? Because you might think that High Noon stops it. You might think that Authority of the Console stops it. Authority might do a little bit more than High Noon. Because of Proft being in the deck, it doesn't need to double spell. It doesn't need to do any of this stuff. So when you look at it compared to Corey Still, it's not countered in the same way. And I've created different ways of countering this deck, which is killing stuff using the new Star Cage in order to take care of all their little guys and take care of Cauldron. So there's ways to get around it. Unfortunately, there's so many different strategies in this deck. If you try to beat this deck specifically, you're probably going to lose to everything else, which if you were in a tournament environment, given the results of all the challenges and all tournaments, you're probably only going to see this deck. So it might be worth it just to do that. But if you're on MTGA ladder, probably not worth it, because you're going to see a lot of people who are tired of seeing this deck. Not only are they tired of seeing this deck, they're tired of this type of meta. And this is why this is over everything else. It's not even about investment, because Wizards is never going to look at your monetary investment into one deck that is currently tier 1. It is about your investment into the format as a whole. So they're going to want to look at how much money that you've spent, say, over the course of 3 years. Were you able to play one deck? And were you able to play that deck, as it is in its best form for X amount of time? This is a number they don't even know yet. Hence why it took so long for them to ban mice, which is not bad. So in conclusion to this whole thing, if they are to ban anything, they need to ban Vivi. Why? Because it's already presented itself as a card that can do more without Cauldron. It doesn't need Cauldron. What it does need is to be killed on site every time it is in play, because it is what they call a very deterministic self combo. So you know what's going to happen. If they're going to brick, draw lands, sure, they lose. They don't do anything with Vivi. But in that scenario, guess what? Every single deck in the game loses. So that's not a Vivi problem. That's a Magic the Gathering problem. You don't play this game and not understand that at any point you can just lose the game because you drew only lands or no lands. So Vivi's not immune to that. Vivi does need things to do with other non-creature spells, which is why designers might look at this card and say, yes, this card is broken, but you do need to have all this stuff to fuel it. It does come down turn 3, but it also only goes off turn 4. It can come down turn 4, but it also only makes +1 mana. So these are all reasons that I personally, when I was evaluating this card on whether or not it should be banned in discussions, came to the conclusion that, yeah, we can probably deal with Vivi if we just remove Cauldron from the equation. But then we're removing Cauldron. So something is still going. Something part of the tier 0 deck, because this is beyond tier 1 at this point, has to go. So what happens here is you end up removing one card, and the real problem is still there and still ruining the game for everyone. So if they kill a card from this deck, they have to kill Vivi. If they end up removing Cauldron, sure, they might regulate this deck, but they'll kill a bunch of other cool things for people to try in the future. A lot of people have invested in Cauldron. It is a $70 card, so it can be really, really sad for people. Again, Wizards can't think about that price. So what they will think about is whether or not this affects more than just this deck. Does it affect its playability? When you go and look at challenges right now on MTGO, you'll see that it is pretty much 80% Vivi over the course of the last week. At the beginning of August, it was a little bit less Vivi, but you were still seeing Vivi get top 4, top 8 pretty consistently, even though it wasn't 80% of the MTGO challenge meta. And recently, we just had a challenge. It might have been a 64, it might have been a 32. I can't remember exactly, but we can check this. It did not fire. Not enough people signed up. And normally during RCQ season specifically, these challenges are filled to the brim because people both want to test their decks and they want to get, into the last chance qualifiers and other things that allow them to do this for a living. So to have it not fire is pretty bad. And we saw this specifically with Legacy in person, in paper. Not enough people were showing up to Legacy tournaments because they didn't want to play against Grief Reanimate over and over and over and over and over. We had this happen Modern because they didn't want to play against Underworld Breach over and over and over and over and over. So this is a problem in Magic. You have one deck that's clearly the best and everything else becomes unplayable when compared to it. So in the interest of everyone investing into the format as a whole, and what that means is you invest in other decks. You don't just play Vivi. Like I have investments into other decks that just simply can't be played right now. Like I love Grixis, and that deck cannot be played. I have tried a lot of things. Currently, I'm almost to a point where I can kind of play this Grixis deck and it functions pretty well. But the only way it's doing that is by having a very, very solid, I kill everything that they play. I can kill their Cauldron, so it has to be like 6 cards in my sideboard just for Vivi, a few cards in my main board for Vivi. I like Grixis Haste with the Frost Siege from Tarkir. I also like Grixis Control. Why? Because I love Kefka. I think he's an awesome card. I think he's a cool character in Final Fantasy, one of my favorite characters of all time. I also love Vivi. I also love Kuja. All really cool characters. But yeah, so my investment there, just not light, about $300 to $500. That's gonna see no play. Casual, you can play whatever you want. But when it comes to a standard meta, these are things that you have to like kind of accept when going into it. Not everything's going to be playable. Not everything that you want to be good will be good at the end of the day. And that's okay. You just have to accept that. Doesn't mean it's not a little depressing. That's not why we're moving this deck out of the way, right? We're moving this deck out of the way because it is simply the best thing to do. And it's not tier 1, it is tier 0. There's tier 1 Esper Pixie. There's tier 1 Demir. There's tier 1, well, maybe close to tier 1, like other combo decks like Temur Battlecrier, Delirium. There's a bunch of stuff to do in Standard. Like, there are so many decks to play in Standard right now. It is great, actually. Standard's in one of the best spots in terms of playable cards that it's been in a while. But anyways, when you have a card like this, choke holding the meta, then those actual playable cards almost feel unplayable, even though they're very strong. This is just more efficient, more powerful than the things that you could be doing with the other stuff. And I'll admit that the mirror doesn't feel bad. It's not a bad mirror. It feels fun. There's a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of cool decisions too. It's not like you're just being like, all right, well, whoever gets Vivi first, whoever gets Prof first. It's like, no, there's a lot more to it than just that. If you want to be reductive and say that it is just that, I would say you're wrong, because it is a little bit more than that. And I played a lot of mirrors with other decks. This one presents more possibilities than others. So we're not arguing that, this mirror is just so mind-numbing and terrible, because we're not talking about domain mirrors. We're not talking about Azorius control mirrors with Wandering Emperor. That meta is not here. The problem is we don't have anything faster than this. And I don't think we do. I don't think we do want anything faster than this. But yeah. Okay. So any discussion on that? Best thing we can do, ban Vivi. Meta opens up. We don't ban Vivi. Meta stays like this. We ban Cauldron. Vivi pops up in a new way, gets broken by a new card, gets broken by different sets. And the problem just keeps going on. There is kind of no end in sight for this issue with Vivi. And it's because, again, it fills its own gaps. It is A plus B on its own. Again, you need C, which is non-creature spells, but within its small package, it does all the things it needs to do. But yeah, so these are good things to think about. If you want to go beyond the Dunning-Kruger, ban this card because I hate that card. I have lost to a card today in Magic, and I am here on Twitter to say that ban that card because I lost to it. What card you lose to? I lost to Bristly Bill. I lost to Tifa. Ban Tifa. Why did you lose to Tifa? Oh, because I didn't have a removal spell. Oh, okay. Well, that sucks. Sorry to hear it. I feel terrible for you. Yeah, we're not banning cards like that. No one's banning cards like that. No one's asking for those bans. You might die to Tifa and Bristly Bill, mauled, and then say, why does this game have no balancing? And then you might go to Mark Rosewater's Tumblr and start bitching at him, being rude, and saying all this stuff that you probably wouldn't say in person. Don't do that. You're better than that. And don't do that to devs in general. Like if you play TFT, if you play League, i.e. any Riot game. Great example, because people love screaming at the devs in that game specifically and be like, no one's balancing this game. Don't be that guy. No one likes that person. Everyone dislikes that person, in fact, to the point where devs will stop listening to you. They have no obligation to listen to you badmouth them in horrible ways and, say the worst thing you can imagine possible. Don't be that guy. So that means don't badmouth Gavin Verhey for having designed Vivi and shipping it in this state, because this was an experiment. It's okay. It's like they had huge crunch. They were working on this set for 4 years straight, and it needed to get shipped out. They needed to have cards that were, really, really powerful. And it's a shame that they had to ship it in this state. Not even in this state, in this environment where there were like a bunch of problem cards. So the problem cards were the entire mouse package. And if you want to talk about A plus B mechanics, the mouse package was all that and more, where it was fulfilling every single condition possible And it was pretty much telling you to have removal or just die, which is not a great place to be. FOMO Profs or Mako Proft, that could be a combo, could be seen as a combo, but Proft would be a combo with anything. Just like a 1-mana removal spell is a combo with killing creatures. A 1-mana pump spell that puts a counter on something is a combo with the creature. This fulfilled all of those because it was the 1/2 drop combo, Wombo Punch of Manifold Mouse into Emberheart, into Heartfire Hero. So, if you look at the bans and you still want to say the devs don't know what they're doing, you are just so incorrect. It's sad. It is not. I feel bad for you because you don't understand what it means to design. You just don't. If you want to look at, what they're talking about, they even said it themselves, combo style aggro. And it strictly is about these mechanics, A plus B, being fulfilled without any downside. So we want to make sure that, if you're designing your own game, if you're doing anything like that, that's like a multiplayer game, you want to make it so, specifically in card games, it doesn't really come down to only a play draw diff. You want to make it really dynamic with decisions. You want to make it really fun and engaging. Essentially what Fire Design, if you understand what that means, in its essence was trying to do, but, don't abuse it like what Fire Design did, because they definitely went a little too far over the mark. And again, you can't blame the devs, can't blame the designers. If you want to point at anything, if you want to yell at anything, just stop, and then stop playing the game. Because the best thing you can do is to not give parent company the money, so they know that this thing was a failure. And the community has had a few L's, more than a few L's when it comes to this. But we've had a few W's, which is with Aftermath set in particular. The Aftermath set allowed Wizards of the Coast to actually see that we aren't willing to pay for this product, so please do not package it like this. Therefore, it wasn't packaged like that ever again. They are now redesigning sets to not be packaged like that, which is a W. An L is where we saw the commander bans, where a lot of people's investments were destroyed overnight. You have people like Josh Lee Kwai going to Twitter and also calling out the designers to the balance team of Commander, which is casually run, which is not professional, by the way, and saying, how could you do this? I can tell you how they did it. They're not professionals. So they didn't understand, okay, if we do this all overnight, it will make people this mad. A mistake was made. And being that they're part of the community, it hit them very hard, not only as individuals, but just mentally. They weren't being, talked down to or whatever. They were just getting straight up death threats from the community. And it was probably some of the worst things that people could possibly say to each other. So, that type of discourse, if you're not a trained professional, that takes a huge toll on you. If you are a trained professional, it still takes a toll on you. So try to be kind to people and don't be an asshole, because a lot of people worked hard on this, and a lot of people like to label people who speak like this, like what I'm saying right now. It's industry plants. Always this Mark Rosewater's underling coming in for whatever. No, it's just someone who understands what it takes to work hard at something, as anything, music producer, designer, artist, all those things take a lot of time, a lot of effort, and you put your heart and soul to everything. Not everything lands. Not all your babies are the hits, and then the thing that people want ends up taking flight. So you have to make kind of broken cards sometimes in order for things to stick. You have to try out new designs and figure out what works. Another thing with, designers, and something I've taken from both Ben Brode talks and Mort Dog talks. Mort Dog is the lead dev of TFT, Ben Brode, designer, old lead dev of Hearthstone, designer and lead dev of Marvel Snap. They took a lot of risks on things. They say, for the most part, when something is risky and say it doesn't work out for the first time. It doesn't mean that you can't do it. It means that you need to go back to the drawing board and try again. If you finally figure out the right balance of like, this plus this equals this, which is the A plus B design philosophy. If even then, when you get it to its lowest possible state in playable form, which is like lower CMC cost, which is converted mana cost on top of, what it actually does, and it's still too broken, then you can start walking away from it. And this is why the Magic devs have made things like Dredge, made things like Delve, made things like Storm, And when you make things like that, then you start to get an understanding of, okay, well, this is too strong. Storm's a perfect example of that because it is literally the measuring system by which they say this thing's too broken. It is X on the Storm scale. So, it just takes time. So yeah, hopefully we see something done about Vivi. In order not just to ban it, because we've had so many bans, but the banning isn't the problem here. It's the fact that we're jumping from this type of meta into another meta that is that again. And it's because of Izzet. It's not necessarily because of Vivi. Like the Izzet in general, blue-red, has the capability of being this broken at all points. So you just have to be aware of that when you see Izzet pop up. Not only will they have a lot of aggressive strategies, which is pump spells, prowess, you name it, all that stuff. That's their aggression. Flyers, dragons, Izzet loves all that stuff. They're also going to have a ton of ways to draw cards. So while killing you, they will be filling their hand up in the process. This has always been the thing that they did. They're always doing this. Every single version of Izzet that's been powerful kind of just does this one thing over and over and over. So it's painful, but it is what happens when Izzet's good. So you can't really knock Vivi for being like this because why? Because again, you're going to want to do things that people like because you want people to play your game. So if a lot of people love Izzet and they love the game and play the game when Izzet's good, maybe we want to cater to Izzet players. That comes with a cost though. This is the cost. I will say that Izzet prowess with Slickshot, with other things that are not necessarily like, the best thing to do in the game, much more answerable, much more interactable. There's so many different things you can do in order to make Izzet more bearable, more manageable. And I think it still is tier 2, tier 1 if you remove Vivi from the equation. Yeah, Planisphere, you have a bunch of ways to make this deck good. So yeah, Vivi dies, Izzet doesn't die as a whole. That is kind of the point of this. Yeah. So anyways, that's going to be enough about that. Maybe we'll get a change, maybe we won't. But yeah, hopefully if anybody's watching this and they have any ideas of what to say or do, don't blame the devs. They're doing their best. Don't be toxic. Just, try to be chill and calm about it because it is a game. If you're enfranchised, just chill out. Maybe this is not the meta for you because we have a long standard. This is one of the great things about it. One meta goes awry, you can wait for a little bit. Maybe your deck might come back up in style. On MTGA, maybe play a different game digitally. If you don't have any other games, maybe find a different game. I don't know. Balacho's pretty fun. Anyways, so that was a big discussion I wanted to talk about. So that's probably the bulk of what I want to talk about here. Just wanted to kind of get that off my chest, blab about that a little bit. So anyways, standard meta minus Vivi. What's that look like? So we got a bunch of things that you can be doing. And we're not talking about Izzet prowess. We have a myriad of decks to play. If you're ever curious on who you should be watching, most people know Ash Lizzle by this point, so they should check out her brews and her streams. Because not only does she brew, she's looking at MTGO challenges. So if you're not per se into her streams or whatever like that, just do what she does. Go on MTG Goldfish and check out what's going on in the standard meta right now by checking out what's happening on MTGO. A little hard to gauge the meta from that. A little hard to gauge what is playable and what's fun. So best thing you can do in that situation is kind of look at Untapped as well. Say if you're playing MTGA, you can look at Untapped and kind of understand like what's going on with that meta. Other things to try is to look on Aether Hub, try out different decks from there. Yeah, there's a bunch of different sources where you can check out different aspects of the meta, because like that is something that will definitely be a thing where you can see one deck is good in this elo, meaning like where you're playing on the ladder, like, oh, this is good in gold, whatever. But yeah, anyways, so I want to kind of highlight a few decks that I think are pretty good, which are pretty good. They're not just pretty good. So number one would probably be Simic Aggro. So Simic Aggro, or Simic Tempo, Simic Landfall, however you want to call it, is definitely coming up in the ranks. A lot of people are playing it. A lot of people are having fun with it. So it's worth a second look. If you ever see that in a challenge somewhere, we'll have links and pictures here. But yeah, the big linchpin of this deck is you're playing Xenomorph Imago and Ouroboros. And these are both from the new set, Edge of Eternities. Really awesome set. I love this set. But yeah, so you use Ouroboros to pump up your entire board, and you can use Imago with land, hence why they call it Landfall, to make this Ouroboros very large and pump up your board by 4 counters, pump up Ouroboros by 4 counters, because it pumps things based on its own power. So this is exponential growth. Then it should have one copy of Herd Heirloom, something like that, which is a card from Tarkir, give you trample, so at least one of your like giant 12/12s can get in. And then it also has another super good card that used to be a staple in, well, not used to be, is still a staple in Dimir Tempo with, Kaido and all that. So it's playing Enduring Curiosity, it's playing Land of Wars, it's playing Ouroboros, it's playing Xenomorph Imago. A lot of new cards, a lot of new fun stuff to do. Yeah, and Simic isn't the worst right now. Has a lot of interaction, has stuff like Flood Maw, can use Bushwhack to kill things. It can sight into Repulsive Mutation, which is a counter spell. So this deck, you can call it Simic Landfall. I would call it like Simic Aggro or Simic Counters, because that's really how it's trying to win, is with counters. And it's not doing it the typical way you would expect with Innkeeper's Talent or something like that, which is another Bloom Barrel card. But yeah, great deck, worth trying out, worth investing into with your wild cards on MTGA, possibly worth investing into in paper. Definitely worth a shot, definitely on the come up in terms of playable decks and cards. Ouroboros currently is pretty affordable. I'm sure this is going to go the way of Bristly Bill as well at some point. So maybe cop it sooner than later. Bristly Bill is currently at like $60, $70. So, and that's a different discussion on why, but it's Commander. It's always Commander. Always comes back to Commander. As a standard format enjoyer, one of the few out there, it makes me sad. But anyways, so what we want to do is find these cool decks and have fun with them. All right, number 2. This is not a new deck, but it is a good deck. And it is fun. It is playing new cards. It is Esper Zenith. We can call it Esper Zenith. We can call it Esper Pixie. That's its old name. I believe that one was coined by Ash Lizzle. She was playing this one well before everyone else. And then around, I would say, December of 2024, maybe beginning of 2025, everybody just caught on to the Selfbound style, because Duskmourn made it really, really obvious with Fear of Isolation, blue card, and Pixie. And then after that archetype became a thing, it really kind of took off. The old version used to play This Town Ain't Big Enough, which is banned now. Unironically, This Town Ain't Big Enough used to regulate Cauldron. This used to be one of the reasons why Cookies would lose to Bounce all the time. Cookies is a good example of the deck that would use Cauldron the most. And this deck would just have their Cauldron bounced and lose all their value. So now Pixie can't do that anymore. So it has to find new strategies. It has been dead just a bit. It has not been working out for Pixie. until Cosmo Grand Zenith of Edge of Eternities popped up. And now you can double spell, which Pixie's very good at double spelling because, you know, pick up thing, play thing, real good. And then just trigger the Zenith. So a couple ways to play this. You can make more dudes, make 2 dudes, or you can put counters on things. Personally, I like putting counters on things. I think it's a little bit better of a tempo play. You can go, here's your typical run out of cards. And I'm saying this from someone who's played this deck a bunch. If you're lucky enough to have Storm Chaser's Talent, which is still in the deck, Storm Chaser's Talent into a Sun Pearl Kieran. Let's just call him Keenan. Yeah, play that out. Turn 2, return your Storm Chaser. You can also play Pixie, return Storm Chaser, play it again. Then you'll have 3 dudes. Turn 3, that's when you want to play Kieran again. Return Storm Chaser, play it again. Bunch more dudes. Ideally by turn 4. So you can play your Zenith out on turn 3. That's just leaving her very, very vulnerable to removal. So you want to make sure that even if Zenith is removed, you get some value out of it. So what we're planning to do here is turn 4, play Zenith, play a 1 mana spell, profit. So best way you can do this is by just adding counters to your board. That's ideally what you want to do because you have so many guys that you made already. Going wider from this point actually doesn't make that turn more explosive. It just makes your next turn more explosive, which we're not really doing unless we're rebuilding. So when you're making those 1/1s, you're typically making them to rebuild your board. So if you already have the board from Kieran, Pixie bouncing, then just add the counters. That's my best advice when playing this deck. A lot of different lines to take, a lot of different ways to play it. But yeah, so this deck can play Kaido, usually on the sideboard now, because you want to maximize the amount of Zeniths you have. You want 4 in order to always draw this Zenith, because the deck is really cruxed around it now. So yeah, that would be number 2 on super cool deck to play right now. All right, so next up we have Dimir. Dimir is not a new deck. It is definitely not new. What did it get though? And there's a lot of different ways to play Dimir right now. The best ways I've seen have been kind of the old run out of stuff, but now we have Tragic Trajectory to kind of fill the gap where Cut Down left. You can play Stab now, so a 1 mana -2/-2. So you want to have these 2 cards in your deck in order to create the Void trigger. So if anybody is out there looking for a cool deck to try out, or they just want to play the kind of meta, like how can I play around this meta? This is a good one. Not much to say here. This deck has been around for a while. You want to play 4 Kaidos, 4 or 3 Enduring Curiosities. The new deck I've been trying out with this has been this deck by Campo. And it's running 4 Kaido, 3 Enduring Curiosity, and 3 Sunset Saboteur. And I really like the Saboteur card. Pretty good against just generally the meta because a lot of decks aren't going super wide. So you can kind of answer the card that you end up buffing. You can also, when you're swinging, remove the card that you buff, because when you swing with this card, it's a 4/1 with Menace, Ward, discard card. A lot of things going on. Just kill the thing that you're buffing. And then it becomes really hard for them to block. So this card is great for tempo. It blows things up. I will give a couple recommendations on sideboard for this. So there's no Preachers in main, no Carsey Revenants in main. I would recommend removing Deathmark or something like that. This is really just for like the Simic matchups and other random other matchups you might find. Deathmark out, possibly a Carsey out, because it does need a little bit of graveyard hate. So I want 2 Ghost Vacuums in there. 3 Annul is another thing that is really, really good right now in the meta. So if you're playing against Vivi, you want 3 Annul. If you're playing against Self Bounce, you kind of want Annul too. So that's another deck that is really worth trying out. All right. So not much to say about that. Another deck that's worth checking out, trying out, is Orzhov Aristocrats or Orzhov Sacrifice. So this deck has taken off a little bit. Really, really consistent in what it's trying to do now. There's a few different versions of this deck, but essentially we got Sephiroth with Final Fantasy. Lovely card. Gives you an emblem. That's a Blood Artist emblem. Blood Artist trigger on an emblem. If Vivi is to get banned, this deck probably would see a little bit more play as well. so don't sleep on it. But new cards in this deck, we got Umbral Caller Zealot. Great card. It is a 2-mana 3/2, gigantic stats. On top of having a free sacrifice outlet, and it allows you to surveil. So this card is obscenely pushed. Does way too much for 2, but pretty fair still. Viscera Seer is a 1-mana 1/1 vampire. Essentially allows you to do the same thing, but it's actually better because it surveils. Because Seer only scries, Woe Strider only scries. If either of those surveilled, they would have been actively better in those decks because most sacrifice decks want things in their graveyard. So this allows you to do all that. Another new card in the deck is Servandum. Servandum is an awesome card. Synergizes with literally everything in the deck. But yeah, it also triggers off of things getting exiled. So now when you get Rest in Peace played against you, Servandum still triggers. And then if you sacrifice Servandum, you can blow up that Rest in Peace because it blows up a non-land permanent when it has 4 power or greater and dies or gets exiled. So great card. Other than that, I believe it should be playing, could play Forsaken Miner. It can play the new Timeless Caller from Edge of Eternity as well. All those do pretty well. But yeah, you don't really need Bartolome anymore. You can play him still. I see him as like a one of in some lists. But yeah, mostly you're just trying to play around Voice of Victory, Vengeful Blood Witch, and Zealot. And the added hits of Servandum and Sephiroth to just end the game. But yeah, other than that, it's a raise the pass pile, and you can just do it all over again. So really, really good deck. It can win against Vivi. It does need to get a bit lucky. And then Vivi can bounce a lot of its good pieces. So it's hard to play around Vivi with this deck. You do have to get a little bit lucky with how it plays out. Okay. So yeah, if you're looking for a good deck to play Sephiroth with, this is a really, really good one so far. Honorable mention is there's a Roots deck that's playing Sephiroth and Timeless Caller right now that kind of does the same thing. You can get Roots, Insidious Roots, and play Timeless Caller, get a bunch of mana, and then, sacrifice it over and over, get a bunch of Roots tokens because it's coming out of the graveyard because you can warp color from your graveyard. You can also do this similar loop with Forsaken Miner. So either or. Yeah, pretty fun deck. Okay, so number 4 on kind of a fun deck to play right now. This is a bit of a different one. So we all know Landfall, and we know Mono Green Landfall. This is more of a best of 1 deck in MTGA right now. But in best of 3, currently this deck doesn't do super well into the VV meta. You're going to find that a lot of decks don't do super well into the VV meta. And we're not going to really mention control decks here because those aren't very fun. As a control player myself, I find this meta really, really tedious to deal with because you end up losing against a lot of the most random stuff on the ladder in MTGA. So not really great unless you're going to go play some MTGO. But yeah, so Mono Green Landfall or Teamer Landfall. And Teamer Landfall right now is getting a little bit of traction. Pretty weird deck. But anyways, its best run out is Land of War Elves and Desage's Chocobo. And the Chocobo allows you to put a counter on it when you have a land enter. We know this. We love this. The little Chocos in the left-hand corner here. And you got Tifa as well. So Tifa, Chocobo, Mossborn Hydra doubles the amount of counters when a land enters on itself. Then we have Ice Till Explorer. This is a huge commander card. People love it. Crucible Worlds on a stick. Landfall, mill a card. So it can put more lands into the graveyard for you then to play because it also has the ability to play an additional land. It's a Zuza. It's self-mill. It is a bug. All the best things. It's also Crucible Worlds. So it is insanely pushed. So it's a great card. And then we have Bristly Bill, of course. Bristly Bill, very expensive card. So if you're looking to invest, you have to be really sure that you're like, I want to play this. But it's not a terrible investment. You will, if you don't want to play anymore, get all your money back for the most part. If not, have a small appreciation in value. So this Teamer deck, though, is main decking 1 mountain and World Soul's Rage. What World Soul's Rage does is allows you to deal X damage to any target, put X lands from your hand and or graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. So pretty explosive turn with Ice Tail Explorer. You can mill a bunch of stuff. This deck has 4, 8, 9, 11 fetch lands that allows you to find more than one forest. Essentially, 11 fetch lands makes one mountain pretty hittable. So, I mean, this is also leading to the next point here. On the sideboard of this Teamer landfall deck, and you'll find this with every single one, this is why they call it Teamer, is it has one island. So you put this island in, and then you can put in 4 Dragonback Assault. And now you just change your whole deck and you become an assault deck. Start making a bunch of dragons. Then you got some Tishana's Tidebinders, Repulsive Mutation. I love this Seed Ship Impact card as well. Pretty cool for artifact decks and for landfall decks like this. Because you can destroy a Cauldron, artifact or enchantment. If it was 2 or less, make a lander token. Cauldron is 2 mana. So it's not a bad card to have. And then another thing that this deck is packing is a lot of protection. Not that much. It's only 6 protection spells usually. Overprotect and Snakeskin Veil. Overprotect gives you Trample, Hexproof and Indestructible, and +3/+3. So really, really good for the final points of damage. But yeah, essentially this deck is super explosive. If you find yourself playing into a bunch of removal stuff, you can kind of switch up post sideboard and become a Dragonback Assault deck, along with Ice Tail Explorer, and that could be your main things here. Play Land of War. Pretty much you never cut Land of War. It's always in. But yeah, great deck, really fun to play. Highly recommend. All right, so number 5 on the kind of fun decks in the meta right now. Give me one. Just bringing it up. Okay, so number 5 on the list today is kind of a mixture of decks right now, because this slot here for me is kind of open. So there's a lot of things you can try out. There's new black, like mono black demon mid-range. It's not playing anything too crazy. Kind of still playing the Bloodletter of Aclazad Slasher combo. So that's nothing too new. Then there's Teamer Otters. Teamer Otters is a really fun deck. I don't believe this has anything really new here. I think it's playing Consult the Star Charts, and that's about it for new cards. Yeah, really explosive deck. If they can't answer your Vitality and Storm Splitter, you just win the game. So really fun deck to play. There's White Weenies. White Weenies is another cool deck to play. A lot of different ways to play this too, but it's also centered around Cosmic Grand Zenith, playing on a ship called Lumen Class Frigate, or Frigate, however you want to pronounce it. Can also play Voyager Glide Car and Sunstar Chaplain, where you're tapping down a bunch of stuff that you own and then putting a bunch of counters on things, gain a bunch of power. Then you can also play Lightstall Inquisitor. You can play Seam Rip Main. There's a lot of ways to build this deck. It's currently not in its final form, so a lot of ways to experiment there. If you like White Weenie strategies, this is a good one to start trying out. And then I think for our last honorable mention, there's Jeskai Artifact. And this is also what they call a weapons manufacturing deck. So this deck, there's a lot of different weapons manufacturer decks going around right now. But this one is pretty interesting because it's centered around what used to be the Simulacrum Synthesizer shell, where it has Repurposing Bay and a bunch of other ways to sacrifice stuff. But what it's trying to do is play like Enigma Jewel into weapons manufacturing and essentially spam out a bunch of these tokens, eventually repurposing Bay into Phantom Train. So you can call it Jeskai Artifacts. Really, it's only playing 2 colors. It's only playing Izzet. And then it's finding its way to sacrifice with Repurposing Bay and Legion Extruder. Extruder can give you a bunch of power, do a bunch of stuff like that. But Repurposing Bay can use all the 0 mana tokens to find a bunch of your 1 mana kind of like toolkit cards, which can be either Candy Trail. It can also be Duskmourn Reliquary, which again, when these enter the battlefield, they also trigger manufacturing again. So it's a self-feeding engine. It costs a lot of mana to do this, so Enigma Jewel is pretty important to this deck. It doesn't really function efficiently without it. But yeah, you can do a lot of stuff. You can use your Cryogen Relic, which is a new card from Edge of Eternity. Essentially, it's a blue Ecor Wellspring, if anybody's aware of that card. Used to love this card. But yeah, enter the battlefield, draw a card. When it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. So you can draw 2 cards off of this, and then you can also self-sacrifice it, put a stun counter on a tapped creature. So it's good. But yeah, use this card to ramp up into a 3-mana spell, which then triggers your manufacturing again. And your 3-mana artifact you get with it, you can sacrifice that, which is like Perilous Snare or something like that, or another Bay, and then get the Phantom Train and kill them. And that's essentially what you want to do. You want to use your Phantom Train to kill them by sacrificing all the weapons tokens. So another really cool deck. And I think this is how we'll template these kind of quick meta overviews for right now. And this is minus Vivi, of course. These are just like cool mentions, fun decks to play. But you'll also see a lot of these decks on the ladder as well. So kind of a breakdown of what's happening in the meta right now, other than Vivi. And then on top of that, there's a myriad of other things that can go on. Personally, I like playing Grixis. I play Grixis Haste, Kefka Control, things like that. I'll sometimes play blue-white tokens. I also like Big Red. Big Red's another fun one. There's also Jeskai Control with Chico. There's Orzhov Control decks floating around. So yeah, there's a lot of really fun stuff to try out, fun stuff to play. But yeah, so that's going to be kind of it for this podcast today. Appreciate anybody who watched it. This is only a first installment, so we're going to get more of these as time goes on. I'm going to try to do these as much as possible, if not just once a week. Don't know if there's enough stuff to talk about with Magic more than once a week, but I'll certainly try. Other than that, if you caught this and you like the vibe, come to my Twitch streams. There will be links to that. I also produce music. You can find me there. Check out my SoundCloud, bro. But yeah, I'm Anti-Negative, and this is the Magic the Blabbering podcast. All right. Later.